All right, welcome back to Just Another Solar Podcast with Luke Beattie. That's me, Karl Jensen. G'day, Karl.
G'day, Luke. How you going?
Yeah, very good. And industry legend Nigel Morris, I think he's running a bit late. It is a Friday afternoon, so he may drop in during the episode. Today, we've got a very special guest. It's the second time on our podcast. It's John Grimes, the CEO of the Smart Energy Council. G'day, John.
G'day, Luke. G'day, Karl. And great to be a return act.
That's it. I think you're the first one. But yeah, so there's been a bit of a shake-up at the Smart Energy Council, shuffling around of the board. Terry Butler has come in as the president. Steve Bloom, who's given a great service to the industry, has stepped laterally or sideways or aside for Terry to come in. And good friend of the show, Sam Kraft, is now the vice president of the SEC.
Yeah, look, it's fantastic. You know, Terry had a career in federal politics. So she was in the federal parliament for 8 years and was the shadow environment minister. So has a whole wealth of expertise. She's a lawyer by training, and so I think she'll be great. Sam's fantastic and really stepping up, and we're really pleased with that. And also Stephanie Bashir, who people might know, she's kind of been in the industry sector for a long time, is stepping onto the board to replace Steve Bloom. So, and huge tribute to Steve. I mean, that is a thankless task. It's an unpaid role, right? It's a volunteer role. He's been doing it since, sort of 2009 or something, and the amount of work that he's given to the industry completely free of charge just because he believes in it has been fantastic. So a big thank you to Steve.
Indeed, that's an amazing effort. I mean, we were talking about it before we started the recording of the show, John. You know, the hours that you put in and the things that we see you doing all the time, and the Energizer Bunny of the industry. You just don't stop. You're always at it, and hats off to you. I'm sure that no one's paying you anything like what the amount of hours that you put into the job. So. Hats off to you. And I always say that we have some amazing guests on the podcast, and you were right up there at the top of the list, mate. Hats off to you.
No, thank you. And, what's gratifying for me is when the industry booms and we're making a big difference, when everyone's busy and successful, job done. That really, because it's about moving the dial on climate, right? It's about actually, and doing it through the market, through innovation. That's the only way we're going to tackle climate change. So that's really what I'm passionate about. So when the whole industry is doing well, I'm so happy.
With that influence, with the Labor government coming in, I'd say that the clout of the SEC increased tenfold, which is great. And you're off to India with Minister Bowen for the G20. What's going on there?
Yeah, fantastic. So energy and climate ministers from the G20 countries are all coming together in Goa in India. And so we'll be accompanying Minister Bowen to the event. I think I'm presenting in 4 or 5 of the different presentation streams. Then we've got a special industry event for Australian and Indian industry with the minister as our special guest, and a second event to be held in Delhi. So it's really fantastic for the minister to see firsthand, the really tangible kind of business to business connections. We went back, Luke, and we had a look at what were the outcomes, the commercial outcomes from the 34 companies that we took to India a couple of months ago. And we were staggered. There's over $120 million of business that's been signed up directly as a result of that visit, and much more to come. So, we're looking forward to making some announcements in India about some of those innovations. But what I can tell you is that the Indian side are hungry. They really love the Australian innovation, the passion, our great technology. And they want to partner with us and actually then take that into the Indian market, and then together take that into other foreign markets around the world. So, India's been kind of the forgotten market for us, I think, but with their massive, just give you a couple of key stats. So at the end of this year, India will have the ability to produce 36 gigawatts of solar panels per annum. Wow. And by 2026, they'll be producing 100 gigawatts of solar panels per annum. So they've got the manufacturing scale. So, it's really interesting. Renewable hydrogen, a whole lot of other innovations as well. Here's another one that's of interest. The electric vehicle revolution in India is a bottom-up revolution. It's about 2- and 3-wheelers. Now it's illegal to sell a 3-wheeler. They're like a motorbike at the front, and kind of like a little ute at the back, right? It's kind of the workhorse of Asia. But now, by law, they have to be all electric. So there are actually literally millions of them coming onto the market all the time, and they're being plugged in in an uncoordinated way that the operator doesn't know when they're going to be plugged in to be recharged or where. So they're trying to figure this stuff out. Now, I reckon that's a great learning for us, right? Let's see how they kind of manage that situation. What lessons can we learn as we get greater penetration of EVs into our market, for example? So it is a real two-way flow, but I haven't seen a more compelling business opportunity in my time in the industry in terms of this new emerging market. And so, yeah, it'll be great to kind of highlight that and push it along.
And when you said it's two-way traffic, I mean, there's obviously their manufacturing capabilities and the business opportunities to find decent manufacturers and products to suit us here. You said it's two-way traffic. So where are the opportunities for Australian companies to benefit in India?
Well, here's an example. We took a company called AREL. They're a power electronics company, multi-generational business based in Queensland. You know, while we were there on the ground, they were shortlisted for a 4 gigawatt project. Now, that would be transformational for a business like that. You know, a manufacturer in Brisbane, for example. Here's another example.
Didn't they invent the MPPT?
I think they did. There's a real history there. Yeah. And Selectronic is another that came on the tour, right? And so opportunities to actually, because the demand in India is going to be massive. They're actually powering ahead with renewables, and they've got scale. So another one's 5B. So 5B are actually establishing a manufacturing plant in Gujarat state and partnering because they can deploy solar quicker and more cost effectively than anyone in the world, right? So they're linking into these opportunities. We were there with a company called Rare Energy, and they've got a renewable ammonia generator. So it's a generator that runs on ammonia, but the ammonia comes from, so you create hydrogen, you add nitrogen from the atmosphere, you get ammonia, it's renewable zero carbon ammonia, and then you use that as a generator. So in places like Uttar Pradesh, now think about this, right? So Uttar Pradesh, the chief minister wanted us all to visit there like the next day. He called up and he's like, I want you to come. It's a state of 212 million people.
Oh, yeah.
and so we couldn't all go. So we sent a couple of companies, and what they said, what the chief minister said, and he's probably third in line to take over from Modi one day. So he's a senior guy in India. He said, we will clear the way. Whatever you need to get you offtake agreements and to actually have you established in this market is what will make happen. So, interesting, dynamic, an overlooked market, but huge potential.
People have just got absolutely no idea of how big this Indian market. Of course, there's more than 1 billion people there, yeah?
1.4 billion. They will shortly be the largest country by population in the world. They're going to overtake China in terms of population size. Just on a footnote, interesting, I was recently just up in China for SNEC, where you might have heard that I fell off a stool and broke my arm, and so therefore came
I didn't hear
early.
that. How did that happen, John?
Oh, it was a disaster. So I get into this Chinese hotel room, and they've got the temperature set at 26.5 degrees. It's summertime outside. I'm kind of sweating my proverbials off, right? So I call up the man. He comes and knocks on the wall with a hammer, says he'll do something and then leaves. And about 20 minutes, half an hour later, I'm sitting there, and that feeling when you're like, oh, I think the air might be getting cooler. I'm hopeful that it is, but I'm not really sure. So I thought, I just got a little stool to stand up and put my hand up in front of the air vent, stood up, and it just collapsed under me, and I just went down. And it's something fun. I was diagnosed within an hour and a half in the Chinese public hospital system, saw a doctor, got a CT scan, saw a doctor, was diagnosed. When I got back home, it took 8 days to get the same diagnosis back here in Australia.
Unreal. Because you would have thought it would be a horrible experience in the hospital, but they've just churned you through.
It was great. But the point I was going to make is just the EV revolution in China, unbelievable. I thought they might have kind of stood still over COVID. Hasn't happened at all. So you're in the big cities, right? Places like Shanghai. 30% of the cars on the road are EVs. Right. So I'm not just talking about normal cars, but light commercial trucks and buses and so forth, all EVs. So a car, you're driving from the airport, this BMW SUV pulls up alongside you, right? It's a normal petrol car. You look at it and you think, 3 hours ago, I would have thought that was a beautiful car. I would have aspired to be in that car. And now it looks like a piece of junk because there's these cars that look like spaceships, all the EVs, and then there's kind of these old petrol cars. So, the transformation is on. We kind of forget that, do you know in China at the moment, sorry, I'm getting excited now.
Oh, please go for it.
In China at the moment, that they are delivering 12 gigawatts of solar per month, right? So far this year, their average has been 12 gigawatts per month. Now, this year we'll do 5, maybe 6 gigawatts of solar in the whole country in the whole year, right? So that's a fortnight's production installation in China. So China's ripping ahead, India's ripping ahead, the US is ripping ahead. They're doing their Inflation Reduction Act. That could be up to worth as much as $1 trillion of investment. And so we kind of, we have this attitude in Australia, the big players aren't moving, so there's really no point. We're too small to make a difference. Bloody hell, we're quickly being left behind. So it's an exciting time on the globals.
On that note, just last week I drove from Adelaide back to Melbourne and I stopped at a wind farm, which I thought looked pretty big. And I Googled it and I made a post to Facebook, this is the largest wind farm in the Southern Hemisphere or whatever. And I see this week we've had a whole heap of data published around how much renewables we actually do have. Whilst South Australia runs at 95% renewables, I think the whole country was 38-point-something% renewables. I was quite interested to see that Victoria actually generates nearly twice as much wind power as South Australia does, but obviously we've got a higher demand, so the percentage is lower. But, the last couple of weeks, we've generated a hell of a lot of power from wind. It's been windy in Victoria. There's no doubt about that.
Then you think about the big offshore wind farms that, the big projects, 1.2 gigawatt projects being kind of, worked up at the moment in Victoria. Really exciting. So completely agree.
I don't understand why we need to go offshore. We've got the 90-mile beach and it's the same bit of wind and there's nothing out there. That 90-mile beach, you can't get even access to more than half of it. I just can't see personally how you can justify the investment of putting them out in the ocean when we can put them on the land. Seems crazy.
I saw a statistic recently in that area, sort of off Gippsland, and they were saying that some of that offshore wind resource, look, don't quote me exactly on the figure, but it was something like, 8 to 10 meters per second was the average wind speed there. So I think with the unobstructed kind of wind, offshore, I think that's the attraction. But like you, we've got so much land in Australia, whereas in places like Europe, they have to go offshore because they've got limited land, so many people. But yeah, I think that, offshore wind will play a role. But yeah, I agree with you. There's still a lot we can do onshore, right? Huge potential.
Oh, look, heaps. And, every time I stop at a wind farm, I park as close as I possibly can. And we've heard this for the last 15 years. A place that's a suitable place to put a wind turbine is not a place that anyone wants to live. It sucks. It's too windy. So standing next to a turbine that's cracking out, 6 megawatts at full tilt and 150 metres away, I can't hear it over the wind.
Can't hear it over the wind, that's right. I read a statistic this week as well that the new offshore wind turbines are 130 metres tall, so about the same height as the Eiffel Tower. And the new technology is that there'll be 20 megawatt turbines on them. So it's like, wow, bloody hell, huge. Like it's really, really stepping out.
Now, John, I'd like to pick up on the EVs because you mentioned what's happening in China, India, and the transition is happening in Australia, but could certainly use a push. So one of the ways that's been done is through fuel efficiency standards. Yeah. Do you want to give us a bit of info on that, please?
Yeah, great. So Australia is, in the developed world, there are only 2 countries that don't have fuel efficiency standards in place, Australia and Russia. This means that even for our regular cars, right? So for a regular Toyota or whatever car that you buy, because the factories gear up, they make these motors and they try and run them out for as long as possible because there's no, they've recouped the cost of capital on them, right? So they've already kind of invested in them. And what they're doing is that they get these, and they're actually very inefficient petrol vehicles, right, or engines, and they sell them into the Australian marketplace because they can't get away with selling them in other jurisdictions. South Korea, Japan, all throughout Europe, North America, even Latin America, right? They say, no, we don't want your clunkers here. And so it is urgent that we put in place fuel efficiency standards. That means these companies are forced to send us their most efficient technology. And the price difference is basically bugger all. It's nothing, right? It's just that they want to send us their old stock as opposed to their new stock. And it rolls on then into electric vehicles because the companies are actually producing this and they've got global demand and they can't keep up with the demand. So where would you send your stock? Would you send it to Norway, where, they're aiming for 100% EV sales, right? And they've got laws to support that. Or would you send it to Australia, where there is nothing that actually drives from a policy sense the uptake of the vehicles? So we've been pushing the federal government really hard, right? I know that they've only been in office for a year, but they need to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time, right? They've got to do multiple things at once. And so we have to get this fixed. Now, we've been pushing them very hard to get the laws in place before the end of this year, so that Australians could have confidence when they go out and buy a vehicle, one, that it's the most fuel efficient available on the planet, and two, and have access to those electric vehicles that everybody wants to buy as their next vehicle.
So would that have an impact on the numbers for EVs? Do you think that that's going to help push a number up, and why? Because you said there's not much of a price difference between the fuel-efficient engines and the clunkers we're getting. Yep. So why would that increase EV uptake?
But basically, it's got to do with supply and demand. So, you try and go and buy a new BYD or a Tesla or something, often you're on a waiting list for 12 months. In some cases, I've heard waiting lists of 18 months to get your hand on these EVs. Now, I heard the minister speak a couple of weeks ago, and he said he's spoken to the heads of these big companies and said, why don't you send more cars and greater range of cars to Australia? And they say, because you don't make us. It's as simple as that, right? If you have to have them in the market, there'll be more of them. With more of them, the prices come down, the demand comes down, they become more accessible, and off they go. So it's an unnecessary barrier, and we've got to fix it urgently.
Yeah, look, John, there are BYD Atto 3s in dealerships all over Australia now. So you can, Shane Arnold, our friend from Fronius, he ordered one on the Monday, picked it up on the Friday. That was how long it took to do the paperwork and so on, as you would get pre-COVID. People are still waiting 12 months for a new Land Cruiser. So I think BYD is going to beat Tesla in terms of total vehicle sales in Australia within a month or two. They've managed to get inventory on the ground, which is absolutely spectacular. And by all accounts, that car is pretty good. It's obviously 15, 20 grand less than a Tesla, and it's got a similar size battery pack. It's similar kind of range, but that's turning out to be a very popular vehicle. And anyone that you talk to that's got one says, it's a marked step up in technology and user friendliness than their existing petrol car. So that it's getting people over the line. It's better than their petrol car. It might not be as fancy as a Tesla with its self-driving, but by all accounts, it's a great car. And I think 50 grand isn't totally out of reach. Obviously we're trying to get more of them. Victoria's just ditched the $3,000 handout from Solar Victoria. That's gone. And Queensland has doubled its handout. I believe it's now $6,000 cash back. And if you take something like an MG4, it's 40 grand, take $6,000 off that, mate, happy days. There's going to be a shitload of those things on the road in Queensland. So I think regardless of the fuel efficiency standards, everybody knows someone that's got an electric car right now, and they all say to their mates, it's absolutely awesome. I love it. It's fantastic. It's better than the last one. And I think that we almost don't need that legislation. People are buying electric cars because they're better.
I had a astounding statistic. I actually got called up to make comment because the National Automotive Association tracked the sale of new cars. And last quarter, in the medium sedan category, there were more electric vehicles sold in that quarter in that category than petrol vehicles, right? Now, that's only one category for one quarter, but it's an indicator, mate. This is absolutely the future. The other thing that I'd say is that in China, there's 4 or 5 major brands that people in Australia have never heard of. But those brands are actually going to take over the global market because China is electrifying its whole fleet internally. That's millions and millions, hundreds of millions of vehicles, right? So they've got the economies of scale, which means that now they introduced subsidies for EVs in 2009. They've just removed them. There is no subsidies for electric vehicles in China because they've already got that mass scale. It was like the solar panels. It's like the inverters, same thing, right? As you get that massive scale, the price comes right down and they will dominate the global vehicle market actually with their brands.
I just couldn't afford a petrol equivalent of my car, John. The Model 3 Performance does 3.3 seconds to 100, and the equivalent to that's a GT3, and that's a $600,000 car. So I had to skimp out and buy an electric one.
Yeah, there you go.
There's no getting past it. You just can't get back.
A couple of years ago, we took a delegation to visit the BYD factory in China. Like, amazing, right? And they, it's huge scale. But they've got a great demonstration where they take a normal lithium-ion battery pack and they puncture it, right? And it explodes basically with puncturing. They've got these new blade batteries where they do the same thing and there is no reaction, right? So in terms of safety and innovation, we're talking to another company in China, one of our members, CATL. They're the largest lithium-ion battery company in the world. They spend $1.2 billion a year on research and development alone. They have 12,000 PhDs in that ecosystem. So they're inventing the batteries of the future. So, it's just like it's on, and what Australia needs to do, we've got all of the minerals that are then refined and turned into the things that go into those batteries. Let's actually value add those minerals here. Let's actually do some processing of those before we export them overseas, rather than just sending dirt overseas. Bloody hell, we can do better than that, right? And retain more of the value for us here in Australia. That should be a national priority.
And of course, the SEC is supporting that. And you had a conference in WA recently because, of course, WA, very resources rich, very mining strong state.
Look, a place like Western Australia is in the driver's seat globally because they've got some of the best solar resources in the world. You think about the Pilbara region of Western Australia, they've got some of the best wind resources. They get that Fremantle doctor, that comes in, but it's right up the coast, right? And so you can actually harness the world's cheapest electricity, and not just the cheapest electricity, but the cleanest electricity. And so think about taking iron ore and turning it into iron pellets, which is a very energy intensive first step in actually making steel, but a huge value add. All of a sudden, you're exporting Australian iron pellets that have zero embedded carbon in them, right, to a world economy that needs this to actually keep powering forward. So it was one of those happy coincidences where we're kind of talking to the mining industry and actually saying, together, we've got a massive opportunity. We're not in opposition to one another. It's about harnessing this and getting the value for Australia. So, yeah, it was a really exciting event.
Okay, so going with the theme of batteries then, obviously it comes up a lot, battery rebates. There's been state battery rebates. There's been talk that the best solution would be something similar to STCs but applied to batteries, because at the moment, we're not going to hit our targets. We're not installing enough solar, wind, not enough batteries to get this transition right and to hit our targets for 2030 and 2050. How do you see that looking?
Everywhere I go, the one question I get is, when is there going to be a battery rebate scheme in Australia? Because everyone in the industry knows that it's a massive force multiplier. It means you can actually reduce the load on the grid, have much more solar. You can do that time shifting from the day to the night time. I used the Solar Analytics, Nigel's company. They've developed this really great tool with an ARENA grant to go in there and actually say, okay, I don't have solar, but here's my energy bill, what have you. And it tells you, well, we reckon the optimum size for you is 10 kilowatt hours and a 3 kilowatt hour battery, a 5 kilowatt hour battery. It's interesting to see that often the recommendation for the battery is not as big as you might think, right? It's not about going off grid. It's just about doing that time shifting. And so it might be a 5 kilowatt hour battery. So imagine a program where 10 or 11 or 15 kilowatt hours is quite expensive, right? But if you're doing a moderate sized battery, you can have a big impact on the grid, but you could also massively save people a whole lot of money. You think about cost of living, you think about power bills going up 24% right now, right across the country, and that not looking to change anytime soon. Why wouldn't you invest in a rebate scheme?
I'm going to jump in here, John. SMA had this thing 4 years ago. It was brilliant. It had about 3 kilowatt hours worth of LG storage in the same box as your inverter. That was a brilliant piece of kit. I'm still a big fan of batteries at peak times when energy is expensive. You don't need to cover the whole night. There's poles and wires to do that. At the end of the day, we've got all of this money that we need to spend in order to make sure that we've got the lights on during peak times. So if we can match that peak time stuff and we can get 3 kilowatt hours, 4 kilowatt hours, my place, I'm only using 5 kilowatt hours a day in winter, in peak time, and in summertime, obviously, we're still making solar out till 7:30 or 8 o'clock at night. So in summertime, it's only 1 or 2 kilowatt hours a day. You've hit the nail on the head. We need something that's integrated, smaller. It's the first time I've heard someone mention a reasonable solution in a long time. Usually it's, we need bigger, we need more. But
it's also for the needs of the grid. So if you had something, let's say, where for every kilowatt hour generate so many certificates. And you could also lever it that certain parts of the grid, not so much on the NEM, but some of the microgrids around WA in the country, that you get a multiplier, you get additional certificates because the benefits to the grid are even more.
Fantastic. And particularly as we're getting areas that are saturated with solar, we're not allowed to put more solar in. This would open up more capacity and actually allow more solar to go in, right? So there's just benefits all around. Think about where we'd actually give an advantage and actually do an offtake agreement with, battery manufacturers to really encourage them to do some value adding here in this country. And so, you don't need much of imagination to kind of hook all this together and really do something quite transformational just with a pretty simple initiative like this.
So what does it take to get the government to write the legislation up?
Well, the very first thing we've got to do is get them to focus on DER as an area, right? They've been fighting dragons and they've had the whole coal keeper thing and the solar stopper thing, and they've had the investment scheme and all these kind of big scale things. They've got the gas crisis. For the first time, there's a lull in the fighting, right? And so my message to state and federal energy ministers is we've got to focus on DER. Because we haven't, it's a massive part of the market today, often in places 37% or more of the market. You go out to 2030, it will be the market, right? It is distributed solar, batteries, electric vehicles plugged into the grid, energy efficiency. That is the market. But it's not being properly thought about from a policy perspective. It's not being properly developed. And so you get these knee-jerk reactions where you have in Queensland a very, very old-fashioned, clunky on-off switch mechanism, right, which adds cost to consumers and just sends the wrong message to everyone, right? South Australia is better in terms of their flexible exports, right, and Victoria is going to come in on that field. But we're going to do more of this. And the message to government is this is not an us or them. Industry wants to work with government. We want to work with the energy bodies to get the best outcome for the whole community, because that's when we all win, basically. So one, we're going to get that on the agenda. Two, we're going to start a campaign to actually get a sensible support structure in place for energy storage. And that's going to be the focus of that part of our business for the next year. I think we've got a good chance of getting this up, but it is going to require, a bit of effort. And there might be times when we do a bit of a shout out to the industry to kind of pile on in support, just to demonstrate that there is good, strong support for that type of initiative.
Yeah, sounds to me, John, like you'd be walking, chewing gum and bouncing a tennis ball at the same time. So there's always going to be a competing technology. And I think that we're underestimating the impact of EVs around how much solar we can get on the roof. So I added another couple of kilowatts to my system. That gave me another 60 kilowatt hours last month. Obviously, that's a drop in the bucket. The weather is rubbish in Melbourne. 60 kilowatt hours isn't a lot of grunt. That's what matched my usage last year. It's pretty much maxed out my roof now, but of course I've got an EV in there, and now I'm 400 kilowatt hours a month short on what I was this time last year because of the EV. EVs provide an awesome bit of domestic storage and grid level demand management around EVs is going to be utterly spectacular. But I think we're still not hitting the mark. We've still got solar companies that are saying, 13 kilowatts is the right number. We're going to go with 13 kilowatts. It's not the right number. The right number's always been fill the roof. Fill the roof. We've got to fill the roof.
Totally.
Now, you mentioned the flexible exports in South Australia. I know that there was a webinar that the SEC had regarding that, and there's also a roadshow coming up.
This is really important. So in South Australia, that they mandated that inverters needed to have basically the ability to respond to dynamic controls, right? That might actually, switch them off or curtail them for a period of time, bring them back on, but in a coordinated way, which actually required the manufacturers to do in some cases, hardware, but often software changes inside the inverter. Now, it's a good example of change management, that the government there set an unrealistic time frame to have that. So that it was due to start 1st of December last year. Nobody was ready, right? And you've got to remember that if you're a big inverter manufacturer, you're producing inverters for the whole world. Remember, I talked about the China market being 12 gigawatts per month, right? So the Australian component of their manufacturing is a small component.
And but mind you, John, to jump in there, at Intersolar a couple of weeks ago, I spoke to a few inverter manufacturers, and two of them flagged with me without prompting that they're all watching Australia because Australia has some of the highest saturation rates. So as much as the time frame might have been unrealistic, as other countries get to similar saturation points, they're going to face the same issues. So I agree we're a small market and they're not going to do things bespoke for us. And we've had a tendency to demand all these little changes and features that the rest of the world doesn't need. But you could argue that this is a feature all of the world needs.
Look, I think you're right. When you see Australia, you see the future for exactly what you're saying. So I think you're spot on the money there.
So
go ahead, Karl.
in that, we just saw some data published, I think it was yesterday, the day before. Australia has got 1.5 megawatt hours annually of per capita of population installed right now. I wasn't sure if it was renewables or just solar. I mathed it out. I think we need somewhere around 3, maybe 4 megawatt hours per person. My family's at 30 megawatts of generation capacity for 4 people, so obviously I'm doing better. But yeah, we're leading the world by a factor of 2, which is fantastic. And this means that we're really getting a bit of energy security into the hands of mums and dads that other countries aren't.
Yeah, we are the gold medal winners. For the change managed in South Australia, though, it was really just about saying to them, give the manufacturers time to catch up. So we got them to sensibly agree to a new start date of the 1st of July. That gave everybody around the supply chain, the distributors, everyone who's holding stock, time to change over. And now the new thing's being rolled out. So on the 24th of July, we're actually holding a seminar with SA Power Networks to do a deep dive into all of the components, how you set it up, what it means, what the implications are. And so that'll be really great, free of charge. And so people are really able to come along. And then we'll be taking those learnings and sharing them with people in Victoria and other states as this starts to roll out as a national. But it's a good example of, if you get it right, if industry and government work together on these things, we can get good outcomes, right? That don't have to be disruptive and kind of upend things overnight. And that's what we're after, is kind of a long-term partnership.
It's another example of the SEC engaging with government, engaging with industry, and getting stuff done. You also have the Smart Installer Program. I think it's a good time to mention that. Give us a brief summary of what that is.
One of the things that occurred to me is that, installers are out there and they are subject to the rules, right? The rules are the Australian standards, but people can't get them, right? Because they're so bloody expensive. I think we did a tally up of the 7 key, from the wiring rules all the way through 5033, 4777, 5139, all of the different standards. And it was like $1,500 a year to actually buy a copy. So what happens is you get these pirated copies, right, that kind of just float around the place. That's what happens, right, in reality. We thought this is a nonsense. So we went and we did a deal, not with Standards Australia, but with Standards New Zealand. Because remember what it says at the front of the standards, it's Australian New Zealand standards. They are the same standards, right? So the New Zealanders were fantastic. They gave us a great deal. That's meant that we're actually passing this on to the members of Smart Installer. So basically you can join up $30 a month and you get access to all of the standards, right? And if they change in the meantime, you just get the updated copy. You can download it onto your iPad or onto your iPhone, whatever you need on the field, right? Because how can you be expected to follow the rules if you don't know what the bloody rules are, right? Just seems self-evident to us.
We've seen that. So the last week also, the Victorian Energy Upgrades Program has suspended a couple of operators and put fairly tight constraints, auditing and so on another half a dozen operators around installing energy efficient hot water heaters. I see that straight up as being a training issue with the guys that are actually at the coalface installing them. Plumbers just haven't had the training, the CPD points, all of that sort of stuff that the solar industry's had. And, whilst we jump up and down and say, these things are shit, they're actually not shit. They mean that we do evolve and we do get better at what we do, and we do learn from our experience and our mistakes, and we get better at what we do. And this is why the rest of the world is now looking at us as to how to do this, because here we are 10 years down the line, we're doing a great job. And, I think people lose sight of how far ahead of the rest of the world we are.
Yeah, no, that's right. And the Smart Installer Program, just a cost-effective way to kind of be fully. Also, we bundle up 100 CPD points a year free of charge, so people can just kind of like relax. They know they can go onto the website, do them at any time. There's not that last-minute rush where you're enrolling in something which actually is completely inapplicable to you, but you're doing it just because you've got to get the points and tick the box. So we want to kind of get rid of that nonsense as well. So yeah, so some good innovation.
From the Smart Installer Program, let's talk about the installer accreditation. That's been up for people to bid for now that SEC's gone in there. How do you feel that's going?
So great. So at the outset, we got together sort of our core members and said, what do you reckon, right? Because in my view, you design a scheme, who better to kind of drive the design of the scheme than the people who are managed by the scheme, right? Because they know what works, they know what doesn't work, they know what's a nonsense. The first thing they said to us was, we reckon the Smart Energy Council should partner with someone in this. And the body that they recommended was master electricians. And that just made sense to me. Master electricians have these kind of training and accreditation programs. They're big trainers in the, they partner with the ETU and others to do actual training of solar and battery designers and installers. So in Queensland in particular, very big. So what we said is, why don't we pool our resources and knowledge into a new organisation that delivers this on behalf of the industry. So it's not about an organisation winning or another, it's about us actually collaborating together to get the best outcome. So very pleased to say that we've partnered with Master Electricians to put in a bid for a new accreditation entity called Solar Accreditation Australia, SAA, Solar Accreditation Australia. And we took a kind of a root and branch review of the whole thing and said, how do we drive this? Because there has to be better ways to get outcomes for installers. Keep the integrity of the system, absolutely. But little innovations, like, for example, if there is a change in standard, actually promulgating that to everybody immediately, right, before it takes effect, so that people aren't caught up, 3 months later, it's like, oh, that came in like 3 months ago, I didn't realise I'd been doing the wrong thing. It's what you were saying, Karl, people are actually want to do the right thing, they're just not trained, right? And if you send them a document that's 3 inches thick, they're never going to read it, right? So just give me the points, tell me what I've got to do, and I'm very happy to comply. We pulled together a brains trust that talked about mentoring in the scheme, that talked about how we do much better professional development in the scheme, how we make it so that, if you call up, you can actually talk to a human being. Like, wouldn't that be nice, right? So these are all the sorts of things that we've put forward. Now, we've put it in, we're in the process, we've got our hat in the ring. We don't know what the decision is going to be. And we expect a decision reasonably soon. What we do know is that the Clean Energy Council won't be doing this going forward. So they are exiting the field. They'll keep doing it until another body is in place. So, they are the authority for the time being. But they will exit and another scheme will be stood up. So
what would it look like in terms of the CBDs then? Because they've got pretty extensive program for the CBD points and how to accredit courses, be it a manufacturer, RTO. So do you think it'd look similar to what we currently have? And would they carry across, or would it be turned on its head?
So what we thought would happen is that we would come up with a competing scheme, and over time we would attract people just by having better service and better outcomes, right? And so we kind of planned it on the basis that it was a gradual. But what happened 2 days after the tender closed, the CEC announced that they weren't doing it going forward. So all of a sudden, we've got to take a different approach, because it is possible that the entire scheme gets transferred on day one, which means that's a non-trivial thing to stand this. It's an
enormous amount of work. There's no getting past that.
It's huge. And so
I'll jump in with a quick one here. I went to a funeral this week. And as part of the eulogy, so the person that was at the funeral was actually an incredible man who has changed the survival rates in Australia from melanoma from being 90% chance of death within 6 months to a 90% chance of survival over 5 years. So a pretty incredible guy. And they called him the MacGyver of surgery. They said out of a group of 100 leaders, you have 90 leaders that will lead through a process of putting out standards and training and so on and so forth. And then there'll be a small portion of guys that are rats that just get the job done. That was a bit of a light bulb moment for me. You've got to have that occasional rat who can think outside the box and change the status quo so that we can make the improvements. In any change of the CEC moves to something else in this particular category, there's an opportunity for that sort of change to happen, which could really help us kick up another gear. We're not getting the job done. We still haven't turned the corner in terms of Australia's emissions. They're still growing, which means we really do need that innovation and that extra little edge to make that turn happen.
Luke, back to your question, I think what we'd do is we'd recognise the current structure and we'd just recognise it immediately, because there can't be a disruption, right? You've got to keep going with what you got. And then over time, you do that improvement piece and that transformation that's Karl's talking about, and it really is a great opportunity to refresh it, to refocus it and to press ahead. So that's the opportunity, and fingers crossed.
We haven't got time for much more. I just wanted to make mention of a new conference that's coming up in Brisbane that's hosted by the SEC.
Yeah, great. On the 5th of September, we're taking like a cut-down version of our big conference in Sydney and delivering it in a one-day format. So it'll be 2 streams, a smart energy stream and an installer, designer, professional development stream. So 2 streams. We've got exhibitors there, and we've got a whole bunch of exhibitors already lined up for the show. And just like Sydney, completely free of charge to attend. So there'll be CPD points on offer, a chance to come and see, the latest innovations in terms of the products and the technology, where the market's heading. We're going to have electric vehicles there. Fingers crossed we're going to have a hydrogen vehicle there as well, as something a bit novel and different, and a great lineup of speakers. So if you're in the Brisbane area, definitely come along. Even if you're not, just in terms of a networking opportunity, spend a day in Brisbane. Hopefully at this stage, the Premier's speaking. We've got a bunch of the different ministers out of Queensland. They've got a massive program to transform Queensland, a big program there. So great way to come, find out about it and participate at no cost.
What a career to jump on board with all of this amazing opportunity.
Yeah, and it's that message for young people too, Karl. We had our event in Perth, and we actually had a delegation come from St Hilda's High School. Girls who were kind of like, interested in, STEM and interested in the industry, and they got to kind of participate in the whole day. And this is an opportunity for that too. So, if you want to introduce young people, give them a bit of a glimpse into the industry, get them along, bring them to the annual conference. It's a great buzz. And then what they find out is that actually all of us have fallen into this industry from somewhere else, right? We've all come to this, and there's a place for everybody. And it's a great community. I don't know of a better industry than our industry. I just think it's absolutely fantastic. And, what a great career for a young person to get into.
John, this is why we love having you on the show. You light me up every time. It's like we're on a hot date and you're saying all the right things. I love hearing about getting our kids involved. As you said, we fell into this through one way or another, and being able to inspire the next generation is something that is really important to me, and you're knocking it out of the park. Thank you.
Just echoing Karl's sentiments earlier, John, we appreciate the work you do for the industry and also what the Smart Energy Council is doing on many, many different fronts. Thanks again for coming on the show, and we'll catch up soon.
Karl, Luke, let me take my hat off to you guys, to Nigel too. I think this format's fantastic, right? It's a conversational, it's beer in the hand. Keep it up. We've got to spread the message, so go get them. Really, really pleased to be involved.
Thanks, John.
Cheers.
Thanks, John. And thanks for listening. Please like, subscribe, share, get other people on board if they're going to get benefit from it. Cheers.